Hey everyone, just let's give it a couple more minutes. Today we'll be talking about, NERC 2024 changes, what we've learned so far. Um, so we've done a bunch of implementations, and we're gonna we've learned, also answer any questions that you guys may have on what's going on with your wind or solar implementation changes. So we'll give it a couple more minutes for folks to come on and then start from there. If you have questions, again, please put them in the chat and we will go from there. All right, so yeah, if you also want to post where you're signing in from, that would be great. I am signing in from Princeton, New Jersey. We're also going to keep this fairly short. This should be about 30 or so minutes, so we don't long. If you have any questions after, I mean, we'll take some questions definitely, but if you have questions after, we will go ahead and add them later. So, all right, so we'll give it one more minute, see how many more join, and then we'll go from there. Yeah, and people are joining from different streams. You may be on LinkedIn, you may be on StreamYard, you may be on Zoom. So it looks like we have 19. All right, we have 20 people so far already. So I am going to actually get started. This way, we don't have to wait. I think we had about 70 sign up, but usually, you know, roughly this is the number that shows up. Everybody's here. So welcome. Today we will be talking about NERC 2024 changes and what we've learned so far from the implementations. And again, this is going to focus mostly on wind and solar GADS and what we've learned. It'll actually be myself, Amit, Patel today. Rashed will join, but he may join a little bit later. He's working on another presentation. So our agenda today is going to be very simple. We're going to talk about a summary, 4 key findings, right, of what we found. Then we'll go into the details and specifically what we found in the event and performance cards and issues around that. Then we'll take a Q&A. So again, we're expecting this to be fairly short. We will not be able to get into, how to fix some of these because they will take a long time for each issue. But I'll show you later. There is an email you can us and we can do question and answer via email, or if you want to do free one-on-one session, we have limited number of those with our subject matter experts to help you as well. Again, it's fully complimentary. You don't need to do anything or pay for anything. So what's our session goal, right? We really have kind of 3 goals. Is we're going to talk about general issues, understand what general problems users are having adapting to these requirements. Then we'll talk about NERC event issues, intersect and dissect most common event card related issues. Same thing with the performance cards, right? What are the most common issues? And then we'll do Q&A. A large majority of this presentation will be focused on the general issues and the NERC issues. Performance issues are a lot less compared to what you're going to see with the NERC issues. Let me know if any questions on this before I go ahead. Please go ahead and post that. We can go ahead and answer those calls. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and move on to this. So about Integ, again, we have presence in multiple continents, US, Canada, and Europe. We have decades of trust and experience. We are the leading provider of GADS in the country. Almost every ISO RTO is our client, as well as some of the largest uh, clients in the country, as well as a lot of mid-size and smaller companies as well. So what we're going to talk about today, we do a bunch of things. What we're going to talk about is GADS and reliability, and specifically the 2024 rules for solar and wind. All right, so what have we found doing, probably about 12 or so implementations within the last just month alone, right? And we've done more ahead of that. And a lot of these we're doing automations. So finding four key learnings. And before I go, most items are going to apply to both, but where it's specific, you're going to have a wind or a solar icon, and I'll point them out. So, number one for solar, right? You have events, and in events, it seems like there was a high complexity in adapting and understanding these, and there were many areas of struggles. On the performance side, it was medium complexity. A lot of the struggles were due to newness. There are a couple of things that I'll point out that were difficult for them to get, but for events, it was very difficult because for solar, this is all brand new. Now, for wind, we had a similar issue as far as events. It was very high complexity. And, again, events are brand new for everybody, including wind. Performance was much, much easier because they'd done about 85 to 90% of it already, right? If you were bigger and you needed to report in Win 1.0, where they struggled was with some of the newer items, such as putting in expected generation and making sure it's done the way it needed to be. Number three, and I would venture to say this was one of the biggest issues, or this is the biggest issue, right? Initially, obtaining proper data. So what are the best PI SCADA points to use? What are the different fault codes? It's a little different on wind versus solar. Solar, it's a lot of very specific points. For wind, it's which fault codes to use and how does everything line up, right? And then where you're stuck, can we use other data or ISO data to help improve accuracy? Then once you obtain the proper data, you had to worry about missing data. Well, if you've got, 100 turbines and you're doing it every 10 minutes, that's a lot of data, right? So can we identify when data is missing? Now, if it's missing, what are we going to do to fill in the data, right? And how do we do this with an acceptable level of, accuracy, right? So that we're not just filling in kind of guessing, right? Now, if data is missing, you have to guess in some way, but what's the most educated way you're going to guess, right? So, and then you had other issues. For example, you could have breaker chatter. You could have data points. You saw the chatter actually a lot more on the wind units. On the solar units, what we're seeing is that often you have different switches and they don't line up. The values aren't what it's supposed to be. So you have to figure out, almost the hierarchy of different points that are more accurate than the others. And last but not least, right, this is very new. So you had folks that were doing traditional fossil GADS. Now, if you have wind or solar, this is new to them. So are they going to be doing it? If you have a renewables org within the regular org, are they going to be doing it? So there are a lot of people and process roles and responsibility challenges. Also, because of the newness and because for some groups this was brand new, testing was a huge challenge. Like, how the heck do we test this? Because a lot of this is brand new and a lot of the people may be brand new to the subject matter. So again, we are not going to be actually be able to solve these problems or show you how to solve them because they're all different depending on each client. But you can email Sunkit. This is his email. Send questions. We'll send you answers back. Our subject matter experts. You can also set up complimentary. Again, there's no cost one-on-one sessions with our subject matter experts. Usually they're 30 minutes long. And if you need more, we can extend it. So go ahead and make use of this. It's completely free. And, in the last few sessions, we've helped out a bunch of companies with this. So, and we're happy to, help further as needed. So let's go into the detailed learnings, right? I'm going to start with something simple, people and processes. We found a lot of changing in reporting responsibilities from fossil. In a lot of times, fossil folks that were doing it traditionally, they ended up keeping that, but then engineering got more involved, right? So this is when reporting was done by the same fossil group. We have other clients where the responsibility was shifted to a brand new group. This was even tougher because these folks were used to, GAD systems, or for example, our system, right? Or whatever internal system or other vendor systems. But then the folks that where this was new, they weren't, they're not used to what needs to be done within GADS normally, a lot of them. They weren't doing wind already, and solar, it's brand new. So it's learning a whole new process for them and what needs to be done with GADS, how these systems functions, how they're reporting, etc. So number 3 had the biggest learning curve and is still having the biggest learning curve. So that leads us to testing, right? These are all brand new. There's no parallel systems that exist, right? So how do you test? Second thing is, we already talked about the data issues, right? They're already complicating the situation on top of testing. So what we've told clients is that number 1, figure out and fix all of these and know when you have these, because otherwise you're going to be chasing ghosts, right? You can't try to do everything at once. Fix this first. As I pointed it out, for renewables, they're new for the fossil group. And if the renewables groups are doing it, some of this GADS may be brand new for them. And events are new for both groups. And the last thing is that, this needed to take time, and, it's a huge change. But what we found is that many folks didn't have some to it. So people had to do all of their regular work and they got thrown into this. So they literally don't have enough time that needs and needed to be dedicated. So a lot of folks are still running behind, especially where we've automated. It's been fine because we're able to do a lot of the heavy lifting. Where we haven't automated, we see a lot of folks that are still kind of running behind because they have to come up with the item. So again, as much as possible, please automate. It will make your life much, much easier. It's not going to solve everything, but with learning curve within a month or 2, I think you should have everything down pat. And it should solve, 95% of your issues. So, and last but not least, very few clients have started to review reporting. So if we look, for example, reporting within our systems, if I look, we're still doing ad hoc reporting within the system, but generally what's going on is that we believe that there's going to be more of a graphical need for reporting. And, there's going to be, you're going to need to look at a lot of these graphically and see and do this. So it's going to be very different from the traditional GADS where, you could be graphical, but a lot of it was very just looking at the hard metrics. But based on everything we're seeing, that reporting is going to need to be graphical. Also, what we want to say is that NERC events are going to provide very limited insight, because if you look at this, right, this is the NERC event that resulted, right? And if you look at the turbine events, there's so much going on. So we're pushing every client to say, create everything at the turbine level. All of these may not result in NERC event or may not impact. For example, if you see here, this unit, this is your 20 megawatt line. It's really going to start here, right? Around this time. But everything's important, right? Depending on what's going on, if you're looking for what's going on with your units, everything's important. So just keep that in mind, that please create your events at the inverter and the turbine level for NERC, and then your NERC events is what you send to NERC, and I'll walk through that later. But this is a very important distinction, because the two reporting, in our ways, when we're doing actual reporting, what's going to happen is that we are going to do reporting, not just on the NERC events, but on the granular events. So we'll let users choose both. Just something to keep in mind. May not be as critical because you're just trying to figure out, get the basics done, but this is going to be critical as you build your system. And again, the last thing is that we're going to need a lot of graphical views. I'm not going to go into this again just because of time, but folks are building out a lot of more graphical views to help with making sure data is good and also to understand performance. A lot of what we do, again, is we graph actual and expected, and then we also show you where the events are happening. So keep that in mind. Any questions before I move ahead? Just let me know. I'm going to go into detailed learnings on the event, so I'll take a quick pause if there's any questions. All right. So let's start with the events. What I can say is creating NERC events is not easy. It may seem very simple, but it's not easy. Two things that can trip people up are that event changes over time and can be ongoing from month to month. And changing a historical portion can result in impacts for future months. So you're not just, so step one, right? What you're doing is you're taking your inverter or turbine events, you're going to synthesize them, and then you're going to figure out, based on the 20 megawatt loss and 95% of the low, right? You have to find the low. Based on that, you're going to create your events, right? But if you look at this, number one, right? When you create your event in NERC itself, right? You're going to create an event with a start end date, right? This is with a start end date. So your actual events, while they look like this, the NERC event is going to look very different, right? And also, what's going to happen is that if you change a month, like for example, if something changes where, from this event, right, it ended at 98.75, now you change February, well, it's going to change to 98.5. So if you were like this and you found out, hey, my February data was bad and you needed to go change it, well, not only do you have to change February, but you have to do a calculation going forward. So as you create your systems, this is going to become very complex, right? If you go back 5-6 months or 8 months, it could affect everything going forward. So you have to build this into your systems. And what we've done is we actually, when you do this, we have screens where you can go ahead and process. And when you process in a prior month, it does a what if scenario of all future months and tells you that, hey, this change is going to have all of this impact. And this can get extremely, extremely complicated. So just to make sure that you account for this, I mean, initially you could just assume you're going to move ahead, but any GADS system, you are going to have to account for this. Or as you change a historical month, you're going to have to just make sure and possibly recalculate everything going forward. So I can't stress this enough. This is something most folks haven't thought of, but it will come back to bite you if you don't have this. Um, there's also an additional complexity with cause codes that we're going to get into. I won't get into it now, but that, there's various complexities, right? So how are you, if you're automating it, how are you going to do it, right? For example, look, I have all of these inverter events. Well, how am I going to get the cause code for it, right? So you have to do some mappings based on what's going on. Or what you can say is, you know what, I am just going to map the cause code for my, and that's it. Right. So I'll walk you through a couple of options later for this. So again, the main point that I want to bring up, creating NERC events is not easy. It may seem simple. There's a huge level of complexity because events change over time, and changing historical data in a past month means you have to recalculate a lot of the future data. So please be very careful when you're doing this. The other point that we're having with events, right, is that when we create these events, especially automatically, we have to default all of them to forced events. And we're just going to first talk about solar. In solar, there's really no way to say, hey, was this a maintenance event, planned event, unless we go look at other sources of data. Maybe you have some sort of ISO system where you had to submit this data ahead of time, right? So you could get it from that and see if it makes sense. This is at the inverter level. But if not, you don't have much other recourse. Now with wind, you have some different tags and things that can possibly tell you if it's maintenance. It's not really going to tell you if it's maintenance or planned, but we could at least set it to maintenance by default. But again, we found that this is not very accurate so far. So what we're assuming generally is that for now, these inverter or wind events that you're going to see, don't worry about coding them, right? The suggestion is just, you're going to have a few NERC events in the month. Go ahead and just code those. And over time, you can build up competency and improve this so you can automate this using detailed mappings based on codes. Then you won't have to do any of it manually. But for now, go ahead and just, worry about cost codes for the NERC events. Do create inverter events by default, because this is going to be required. Number 3 or 4 actually is you're going to need to allow for manual event changes. So when you have issues where there's a comms problem or something, right? We normally look at the data and we point this out, we fill in, but where you can't fill in, somebody may need to put in an actual event, right? They may need to put this in and say what the times were and whether it was a forced or a maintenance. Also, so once you do this, you need to recalculate. We also calculate all the performance per inverter. We're not expecting anybody to update this manually, but you can if you want. So we have the ability to do all of these. We create them automatically at the granular level, and then, and we allow you to change it. And if something changed, like this one was changed, manually updated, it shows you, so you know historically what you did possibly, and you can record a note and anything for that event as well if you wanted. So keep that in mind. Again, this really complicates what you're going to be doing, but I promise you this will be important. This is going to pay dividends later. And last thing is that, the solar automation logic, we needed to also utilize sunrise and sunset. We found a lot of the other stuff sometimes wasn't reliable, and we had to do a lot of hierarchies for solar. So keep that in mind. We have a bunch of items for wind, but they were very specific to the type of unit and the implementation. So I'm not going to go too much into it of what we needed to do for the wind, because each implementation has been different, and even within the same manufacturer, the codes and etc. were very different. So if you have questions, again, for events, you can email Sankit at this address, and you could just email questions or schedule a session. So last but not least, we're going to get into performance. And for performance, really for solar, at the end of the day, we were able to get everything done, but certain things such as performance ratio, expected generation, clients needed to give that to us for the most part, or they needed to give us the underlying information for these. And that took a little bit of time. Also, reserve shutdown hours were not as easy to get as they were for wind, for solar. For wind, we kind of had similar, and I think for we had the same issue with the reserves, and we also had issues with Ruth, which is resource unavailable. Depending on clients, depending on different fault codes, the numbers varied by quite a bit. So this took a while to nail down with clients. On the solar side, again, it was the expected generation and the solar performance ratio calcs that took time, and expected generation, needs to be from pi and SCADA. Performance ratio, we had a bunch of clients that said, you know what, we're just going to give you the underlying data, you calculate yourself. And this was, this was a more detailed calculation, so it involved a ton of data for us. So that's pretty much it for the findings. Again, I wanted to kind of keep this to half an hour today. You can email Sankit if you have any more questions. I'll take any questions if anybody has them right now. If not, please email Sankit at this email address, and we'll be happy to do a Q&A and answer your questions. Or we could schedule a complimentary session, one-on-one, or one-on-one with your team. But it'll be one of our subject matter experts that'll be there, and they can help you. If you do this, though, please send as much information as you can ahead of time. 50-50 where people come on, don't send anything, and those take way longer. And the folks that send information ahead of time, those are much quicker and easier. Again, we've got maybe 2 more minutes. Let me know if there's any questions from anyone. Please post them. I'll kind of wait a minute or so while I ask these questions. And hopefully at this point, you should be gathering your January data. And if you needed to report as if everything was today, we're hoping, what we did is we started with July from last year, and we've worked our way back forward. So even if you can't do January, I would say go ahead, start with July, and you should be able to do, 6 months from last year. And then January should be your, all right. So January should be kind of easier if you've done all of those other months. So, all right. So looks like we really don't have many questions at this point. Again, I get a lot of questions after the fact from everyone. So that's perfectly okay, because they may end up having more questions after the session. So go ahead and email us for any more questions, and we'll go. So, all right. So it looks like the live session's a bit delayed on LinkedIn. So I'll wait maybe 30 more seconds for any more questions. All right. Thank you, everyone. Take care.